So the musical The Book of Mormon has a song called Spooky Mormon Hell Dream, wherein the main character is a Mormon missionary, breaks one of the mission rules, and proceeds to have this really intense, guilt-fueled nightmare. And it's not a good time for the missionary. Hitler and Jeffrey Dahmer both come on stage and tell him, like, hey, what we did was bad, but what you did was way worse. There's Starbucks coffee cups dancing around him. At one point, Jesus shows up and calls him a dick. It's all just totally insane. And Beau is Afraid feels like Ari Aster's attempt to capture that energy in cinematic form, to put Joaquin Phoenix through a spooky, Jewish, overbearing mother dream. And it's 3 hours long, so buckle up. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jake, the Scary Story Guy, and today we're talking about Ari Aster's third feature film, Beau is Afraid. I reviewed Hereditary and Midsommar over the last few weeks. I gave them both 5 stars and really consider them to be masterpieces of modern horror. And I also consider Aster to be one of the most exciting directors, if not the most exciting director working today. But his movies can be a little out there. So when I found out that his newest project was going to be a 3-hour surrealist odyssey starring Joaquin Phoenix, I thought I might need to mentally prepare myself for this. But there is simply no preparing for a ride like the one Ari Aster is taking us on here. I mean, honestly, unless you're willing to just walk out of the theater, you're going to be as helpless as you know, a first-time skydiver who jumps out of the plane with a pro, and then the pro just decides to start doing backflips the whole way down and screaming in your ear that he's not sure if the parachute's going to work. I mean, what the was that? Even the genre itself is more or less impossible to pin down. Obviously, Hereditary is straight horror, Midsommar is horror as well, although I think maybe in a different way. Beau is Afraid is honestly like a cinematic Rorschach test, where it will either be a comedy or a horror to you, depending on what you personally find funny and scary. Personally, I thought this was one of the funniest movies I've seen in ages, and it didn't scare me at all, though I should add a disclaimer to that, which is that I have a perfectly normal, loving, uncomplicated relationship with my mother. So good job, Mom, and hi, if you're watching. Sorry I curse so much. But with Ari Aster's mom, I almost hope she doesn't watch his content, because that woman would just have to be mortified sitting in the theater watching this movie, like turning into the living embodiment of this meme. Because plot-wise, there's so much to say that there's almost nothing to say. But this is the story of a man who is going to visit his mother. It feels like the understatement of the century, but that really is the gist of it. And along the way, this man, Beau, is... how do I explain this? He's constantly besieged by the concoctions of his fearful imagination, right? All the things that he's scared of materialize in front of him. So from the first 10 minutes of the film on, you've either got to say, okay, Beau is really living in a world that is far more violent and terrifying and threatening than our world, and everyone else is just acting totally normal about it except for him, or what we're seeing on screen is not intended to be a representation of actual events, it's an interpretation of how Beau sees the world. I feel reasonably confident in saying it's the second of those two options. I feel better about the film if it's the second. But like I said, I mean, the word odyssey really is a good one to describe this movie, because it's very episodic in nature. It's like your hero starts here and he finds himself in all these really bizarre settings before making his way home. Like a huge chunk of this movie is Beau's been in an accident, and he spends a lot of time living with this couple who nurses him back to health. Then another big chunk of the film, he's in the woods with these orphans putting on a play. And there's a fairly stunning animated sequence there. Honestly, you could tell me it was 30 minutes long and I'd believe you. But even though materially the film sort of feels all over the place, I do think you get the sense that thematically it's all cohesive. In every one of these diverse settings, Beau is acted upon by a world that he is equal parts frightened of and unprepared for. He's just totally unassertive, and so he almost never takes action himself that moves the plot forward. You almost feel like you're watching a deer, just helplessly, instinctively carried by his own legs to wherever the predators are not. I mean, Beau is afraid, right? But why is he afraid? Well, the through line here is his relationship with his mother, who wrapped up so much of herself in him that it almost required him to be fearful, not even so much for his own safety and well-being, but as for how his safety and well-being would impact her. And it's this sense of feeling responsible for her emotional state that enables her to maintain this kind of Freudian role of the devouring mother throughout this narrative, even though she doesn't really have that much to do with his life. At the time this movie starts, they see each other only every few months. And you know, we often see the effects of abusive or severely neglectful parents portrayed in fiction, but here it's interesting to see the other side of the continuum. Because we do think about, you know, being protective, being nurturing as the ideal maternal instincts, but what happens when they get taken too far. Now you might be hearing all this talk of social anxiety and devouring mothers and thinking to yourself, where's the comedy? This sounds like the least funny thing ever made. And that's where I say this film is really going to reflect your own personal neuroses and life experiences. I consider myself a fairly anxious person by nature, and I've seen films that really bring that emotion out of me. I almost had to turn off the movie Uncut Gems because it brought me to a state of genuine panic. And I thought I was in for something similar with Beau is Afraid, just based on what I heard people saying about it, but I've got to be honest, this movie didn't make me anxious at all. And I think that's just because it's almost too surreal to pack the emotional punch for me. I'm more of a type A overthinker, kind of anxious, planning for every possible contingency, calculating risk. So as I watch Adam Sandler dig himself into a deeper and deeper hole in Uncut Gems, I'm just like, Jesus, we are approaching the ninth circle of hell here. While Beau is Afraid will evoke Dante for people with social anxiety, people who feel threatened even just kind of by walking down the street, people who would rather claw their own eyes out than accept a phone call from their mother. And happily, I'm none of those people. So I was able to just sit back and laugh in bewildered disbelief at how totally bonkers this movie gets. And I wasn't the only one, right? I saw this with my buddy opening night in theaters. It was a packed house, and I gotta tell you, I have never seen an audience react like this to a movie before. I can only describe it as a near constant smattering of nervous laughter. The kind of laughter where you're like, is that funny? I don't think that's funny, but it's just, it catches you so off guard and it's so absurd that the laugh just escapes you. And people weren't even laughing at the same stuff. The whole theater was just being like kind of peppered with these random laughs from people who just noticed something that shocked them. It's not even always the stuff your attention is directed to. The background of this movie is meticulously crafted so that all the graffiti and the signs and stuff that you see in the periphery is just saying the most ludicrous shit. And so you'll be well rewarded, I think, for paying attention to those details too. But yeah, by the end of the movie, people were just sitting there in stunned silence. I mean, the credits are rolling, nobody's moving, nobody's making noise, the lights are up, everyone's just kind of like... And over the course of a few minutes, people just start to say to themselves, like, I guess we go? And everyone just kind of stands up in a daze. We're all making eye contact with each other as we walk out of the theater. Like, what in God's name was that? Like, I've never had such a communal experience in the theater before. And honestly, if I could give one piece of advice for going into Beau is Afraid, it would be to go see it in a theater at a showtime that you think is going to be well attended. Because first of all, I think this movie is alienating enough and niche enough that it's going to have trouble making its considerable budget back, and I want people to go and support it for that reason. But beyond that, I do feel like I would have been more alienated and like, about this movie if I had watched it at home by myself, where I was free to pause it, where I was free to, check my phone or whatever. I apologize, I'm having to be really vague with a lot of what I'm saying here, but, I feel that this is not only a movie you should probably go into as blind as possible, but I'm also like, what do I even say to explain this to you? It's rare to find a movie that defies description like this. I normally tell my wife the plots of like the horror movies I see, and she's usually able to follow them. I didn't even try with this one because it really just needs to be seen to be believed. Joaquin Phoenix is great here, as we knew he would be. He's really one of the few actors alive that I think could have pulled this off. But I will say though, he's not like carrying the movie the way he does in Joker, for instance, where it's like this tour de force performance with gravitas. Beau is such a passive, emasculated kind of doormat of a character that sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a lot for Phoenix to do here. He's more the vehicle that is taking us to everything in the movie rather than the thing we're actually watching. It takes a really talented actor to pull it off, but what he's doing isn't necessarily intended to showcase his talent as an actor, if that makes sense. And of course, Ari Aster once again proves himself to be nothing short of a modern master at work here. It's amazing to find a movie that feels so mad and meandering, yet so meticulously well-crafted at the same time. It's honestly like an exceptionally made fever dream. He's so good at building something up, producing dread, and then just totally undercutting your expectations for what's gonna happen in a more wild way than you can imagine. Like that feeling you get when those naked old people show up in the house at the end of Hereditary. Picture that on steroids for 3 straight hours, and you've got Beau is Afraid. I'm thinking of one scene in particular in an attic, no spoilers, but there is something lurking up there. And you could have 1,000 guesses a day for 1,000 years and not guess what it is. It is very, very impressive stuff. I am impressed. I might never watch it again, but I am impressed. Beau is Afraid is really one of those movies that just kind of seems to transcend the whole concept of a rating system. Like it feels weird to just you pick a number of stars between 1 and 5 and be like, that's how many stars this movie is. I'm gonna do it. I guess I'll give it 4 stars if I have to pick, but it almost feels like a non sequitur somehow. The main thing I want to convey here is that you will have strong feelings about this movie. You will never forget this movie, and if you have even the slightest tolerance for absolutely deranged 3-hour journeys through one director's mommy issues riddled mind, you should go see Beau is Afraid immediately. Alright guys, that's all I've got for today, but stay tuned for my thoughts on Evil Dead Rise coming soon. As always, if that's not enough, you can check out my original horror stories in the description below. And in the meantime, thank you for watching this video, and here's hoping you survive to see the next one.